Welcome back. Now, for those who weren't auto-assessed by SARS, tax filing season is underway until 20 October. And with SARS on the hunt for an additional 20 billion rand in tax revenue collection, just how can you legally make the most of this filing season? Roxanna Naidoo, head of global strategy at Latita Africa, joins us with some tips. Roxanna, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. So filing season is open, and there's been a lot of noise about the auto assessments. If I'm sitting home and haven't received an auto assessment, what should I do now? What should be my next move?
Thank you so much for having me. So yes, this year I've seen just how much SARS auto assessments have transformed the filing season. So between the 7th and the 20th of July, millions of taxpayers were assessed automatically, and then many of them would have received refunds within, say, around 72 hours of acceptance. While it is a major convenience, I always caution taxpayers that auto assessments doesn't necessarily replace diligence.
Yes.
So if you've not received that auto assessment yet, you need to go and access your e-filing. On those auto assessments, they rely on things like your third-party data from employers, your medical aid returns, your medical aid contributions, retirement funds, and third-party data from banks. So if you have other income like rental, freelance, foreign income, none of that is going to be included automatically unless you've declared it. And then the system won't capture that correctly.
All right.
So if you haven't received an automated tax return, you're now going to be part of that group of taxpayers who now need to file as an tax return directly through your e-filing portal.
And just sticking with those auto assessments, what are some of the issues that have risen when using the auto assessment feature? You touched on how sometimes the auto assessments don't have all the information. Talk to me about how that can be resolved besides just manually actually putting in your documents or filing manually on the platform. And also, let's talk about when you don't agree with that assessment, what happens after that?
So my golden rule is always review, reconcile, and only accept it if it's accurate. So if you found a discrepancy, you can file a corrected return immediately, and then you can then take steps. The extra step is what means taking the tax record clean and ensures that you stay ahead in increasingly data-driven tax environments. So if you're looking at how you're going to, perhaps if you don't agree with the auto assessment, there are ways that you have to remedy this. And one of them is your dispute process. And then when that dispute arises, if you have a look at your tax return and you believe that you don't agree with what's on there, I tell the clients the same thing I practice: act quickly and document everything. So if you disagree with an auto assessment, you then have 30 business days to request reasons, and you have 80 business days to lodge an objection. And then my personal approach is always to request reasons first.
Yes.
Because that then gives SARS an opportunity to clarify their position. And it also gives you more time to prepare a strong evidence-based objection. Taxpayers should also ensure that they submit a suspension of payment request as early as possible if required. Because then SARS follows something called a pay now, argue later principle.
Okay.
But if you can justify the dispute, you can often avoid paying until the matter is actually resolved. And if the objection isn't successful, then the next step is a notice of appeal, or even alternate dispute resolution, which I found to be a practical and often a faster route before considering litigation.
And just on the back of the disputes, you talked about when there's perhaps a liability to your name. With that being said, right, in the process of the dispute, can the taxpayer then, I guess, apply for a payment plan of some sort?
That's a great question, and I think taxpayers often confuse a dispute versus an actual tax debt liability that's owed to SARS. So there's a difference there. When SARS sends you a letter of demand, you have three options. The first one is do I owe this money to SARS? Do I agree that I legally owe these funds to SARS? And if so, can I afford to pay it? So your first option is, can I afford to pay it upfront? And if you can, you pay that upfront to SARS. If you can't afford to pay it upfront and you need just some time to, save up and pay over a certain period, that's called a deferral of payment. SARS makes that quite easy for taxpayers. If you log onto your e-filing, there's a button that you click on there that you can apply for a deferral of payment. If it's a larger amount, you probably need some assistance from a professional, but
Yeah.
usually a taxpayer can get that done easily. The second question you need to ask yourself is, can I really afford to pay this amount or the deferred amount over a long period of time? If you genuinely can't, perhaps, your company's been liquidated or there's no way you can gather those amount of funds. It's potentially a debt that's been collated over a long period of time. This is when a taxpayer can opt for something called a Section 200 tax debt compromise. That's when you approach SARS with a legal argument to say, I genuinely cannot afford to pay this amount that's owed to SARS right now. I don't have the financial means to pay it. Can I compromise and potentially pay, for example, the initial principal debt, which was, let's say, 100,000 versus the 300,000 that has racked up over the years, that includes interest and penalties that SARS has imposed. And again, SARS is quite forgiving on things like that. And if a proper legal argument is put in place with SARS, SARS will definitely consider your application to reduce the amount of tax debt owed. The third option is when you decide, no, this is incorrect data, and this is not actually owed to SARS. I don't agree with the amount, and that is when we enter into a dispute with SARS.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to something different, right? We've seen a growing trend within SARS where they are they're using a lot more of these AI models, and with things moving onto digital platforms, there are risks around cybersecurity and scams, and we have been seeing some of those scams making headlines this tax filing season. Talk to me about how taxpayers then can protect themselves.
So that's another area I've become very vocal about, cybersecurity, especially during the filing season. Every year I see a spike in phishing attempts. My rule is simple. SARS will never ask you to click a link in an email or an SMS to log in or claim a refund. I only use the official e-filing website or the Mobi app or the SARS WhatsApp services. And if you do get a suspicious message, call the SARS fraud line before you do anything further. Protecting your credentials is important. It's actually just as important as filing your tax return correctly.
And before I let you go, Roxanna, just talk to me about, I guess, the role of financial literacy and how that plays into managing tax obligations and your overall financial health.
The main thing there is to remind taxpayers is that you need to make sure you hold on to all of those documents for at least 5 years. So whether it is bank statements, whether it is medical records, anything that has a SARS deductible items on there or SARS credits that you can use for declaring and filing, make sure you keep all of those financial documents on you. It doesn't matter where you keep it. You can have a little shoebox that you have it on, scan those records on an email or onto your laptop. As long as you have that evidence with you at all times, that's the most important thing. Remember that SARS can still, even though you've been auto-assessed now or SARS, your e-filing profile is in the clear, SARS can still audit you back up to 5 years prior. And then when they do audit you, you need to now go back and find all of those documents, especially as we discussed earlier. If you want to enter into a dispute, you need those documents as proof.
All right, let's leave it there. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. That was Roxanna Naidoo, Head of Global Strategy at Latita Africa.